Hyperdemon is an arcade first-person shooter that released on PC via Steam on September 16, 2022. The spiritual successor to Devil Daggers, Hyperdemon is a game where the goal is to get to the end. In order to do so, you must kill with enough speed and ferocity to add time to your score. In Hyperdemon, time and score are synonymous. Killing increases your time, but of course the counter is always going down. Hyperdemon provides several tutorials of movement, combat, and enemy weaknesses, all providing the tools you need to improve your play. But, just because you have the tools, learning to apply them is where the meat of the game is to be found. By watching your replays, and the replays of others on a leaderboard, one picks up on skilled trends and new discoveries. On the one hand, the game is competitive, where people vie for top spots on the leaderboard. On the other, the game is collaborative, where players are forced to showcase how they achieved the score that they did, thus revealing the magic trick. What you are seeing is a compilation of my high scores that culminate to as far as I could go. Hyperdemon is, in a sense, a clear successor to older-style arcade games, most notably Robotron 2084. I had never played Robotron, but had heard it discussed in the annals of video game history with hushed and reverent tones. It is the sort of game that rewards an athletic skill, both in accuracy, positioning, and agility, much like Hyperdemon. Most recognizable immediately is the black backdrop. There is only signal in old arcade games, without any sort of noise to distract whoever is playing from what they need to do. A similar feature set adorns Hyperdemon. It is a shame that, in 2022, many of the dazzling features of what makes Hyperdemon great is limited by current technology. While original arcade games could properly display vector graphics on a black backdrop thanks to cathode ray tube hardware, our LCD screens and our YouTube compression, along with a refresh rate at a standard 60 Hz, not to mention a lack of spatial audio, makes the experience of watching Hyperdemon totally abridged to what it feels like playing it firsthand. Hyperdemon is one of the most consuming and enthralling video games I have ever encountered. Every visual, every sound, combines to communicate to the player exactly what they need to know. The types of sounds chosen all reflect the intensity of the desired final product, a truly demonic, hectic, yet entirely unforgettable experience. What I am trying to say is that the experience is cleaned out. One of the best things about the game is its speed. It takes seconds between starting the game, blowing through the splash page, and starting a run. There is even a dedicated button, R, to starting over quickly. And the game begins again immediately. There are no load times, save when the game is physically uploading a replay onto a server. For older players, who have less blocked out time in their lives, the prospect of putting a run in is very easy. More important is the simplicity of the design. There are no levels, there is no progression. The only progression that occurs is in the old school idea of getting good, which seems to scare many developers. There are no cutscenes. There are hardly a wide variety of enemies, though each enemy challenges the player in very discreet, fascinating ways. The moves are simple to learn, but layer over each other in such a way that it makes the necessity of watching others play sort of paramount. And the social learning from replays is hardly found embedded explicitly into the design of other games, quite like it is with Hyperdemon. Watching replays is incredible. A player can slow down any replay to such a minute degree that no amount of speed is able to hide the truth of what a player did in those moments. The game not only gives you the tools in the form of tutorials, but also provides the means to explore successful strategies yourself in these replays. Without these high scores, I would have been unable to improve my score nearly as much as I have. Social learning is just as important, and perhaps in certain cases more important, than just the analog learning of a player and a game. So what we get in the end with Hyperdemon is a distilled example of deliberate practice. Many of us have heard of the 10,000 hour rule, popularized by Malcolm Gladwell, but many forget the detailed version, proven by psychologist Anders Ericsson. In his book, Peak: Secrets from the New Science of Expertise, he is careful to emphasize that deliberate practice has to be deep, intense, active, and cognitive. It is not enough to simply spend time with the thing you want to master. It has to be sought after in a way that makes you work at the parts that define the skill. But in order for something to even be a skill, the system must provide a set of limitations, rules, and a goal of sight, space, sound, or whatever. Becoming a virtuoso at the violin is only possible because we have an idea of what a master sounds like, and that is all based on a set of conditions that we can exploit and master. One example of deliberate practice in my playtime with Hyperdemon is in the use of the laser. If a player holds right-click and absorbs crystals, the player then has the option to fire these crystals back out in the form of a laser. By rebounding the laser off the ground, the power and the effectiveness of the laser rises. Unfortunately, I had really spent most of my early hours of the game learning the basic calisthenics. I had spent very little time effectively learning the benefits of using lasers. Once I saw enough people high in the leaderboards effectively use lasers to be far more lethal, I knew I had to learn how to do it right. I spent 3 to 4 hours one Saturday painfully unlearning bad habits and instead trying to use lasers as they did. It was not pretty, and I was often frustrated. But, as you can see, I eventually made it through the experience. I was able to increase my time by quite a lot in the long run. A little bit of suffering early produces big gains later. Many games in the 21st century attempted to make themselves bigger and bolder, and sometimes this cost them the opportunity for higher skill ceilings. That is because there is either a mechanic that is designed to hinder growth, or that is designed to encourage more play rather than skilled play. The infusion of role-playing mechanics into every genre may make the carrot at the end of the stick more appealing, as players work ever more to acquire better weapons and armor, but it sacrifices the gameplay itself. In many of these games, most notably something like the Assassin's Creed series, we can see that this change may actually inhibit the original idea of what the game was supposed to be to begin with. What made Halo fun was its ability to take the arena shooter of the 90s and update it with a broader scope, militarizing it just enough with grenades and melee, as well as adding vehicles, to produce a sandbox that made learning and skill rewarding intrinsically. If someone has played Halo since 2001, many of those skills easily shine through now, over 2 decades later. Hyperdemon offers a clean slate, with very hard rules and limitations. If you do not kill, the timer goes down, and new enemies will not spawn. There are moments when a player knows that a run is going badly, so their only choice is to get aggressive and work through it, or simply restart. A player is expected to succeed only on top of a massive iceberg level of failures that other players can attest to but never see. We each know that we are rigorously exploring and working through it, and with each new aspect learned, we are able to leverage our skill further. It is disappointing to say, but few games offer this sort of experience anymore. Many players, for $15, may expect there to be something else in the act of playing the game. Perhaps new characters or skins, some dangled treat. These sorts of players should not play Hyperdemon, because what they are looking for is not necessarily a good game, but a familiar game with content. I am not old, but I am not young either, so I know that I may find myself realizing that I cannot beat Hyperdemon. Perhaps earning the one and only achievement is a true challenge, so it earns the name achievement. I am comfortable with the idea that I may never beat the game, but I am absolutely cherishing the act of trying, as Hyperdemon does so many things right towards what some gamers want. I may be in the minority here, but I do not necessarily think that all games should be designed with all gamers in mind. When Herman Melville wrote Moby Dick, he thought of the brutality of the sea as internalized by a certain darkness in the soul. The end result is a prose poem with Shakespearean language and a dedication to whaling that many people have no interest in. Very well, there are other books. When Fincher made Fight Club, he accentuated the cynicism from the Gen Z age group. Sentimental millennials may have a hard time agreeing with this cynicism, but they recognize the power of the style. I may never master Hyperdemon, but I still can appreciate the tradition that the game aspires towards, because it does so in an original way. Each time I die, I know why. It is my fault, and so I either learn or quit. It is that simple. Hyperdemon is a game that plays to the interactivity of games to its fullest, at the sacrifice of nearly everything else. Because of that, its weaknesses seem more like trade-offs, while its strengths feel perfected. One may think that 5 enemies is too little, but each enemy works with the others. The floating demons are the most aggressive and will pursue the player relentlessly. The crab creatures remain static, while the snakes and the other bugs are far more territorial. Floating skulls can fly quickly horizontally, but the snake body can coil higher in the arena, posing a risk to players who wish to rocket jump in the air. Crabs raise and lower, while the skull spawner has a weak point crystal higher up, thus incentivizing verticality. Adding a sixth enemy only invites redundancy of space and time, with reach and speed, or with aggression and docility, that the game has already attended to thus far. Other games either create many enemies with overlapping behaviors, or few enemies who do a single thing. It may shock you to hear this as you watch this footage, but Hyperdemon is a game of immense clarity. There's no music, instead leaving all sounds to the diegetic maneuvering of player and enemy. Frequencies and pitch are carefully designed to communicate to the player anything at any given moment. The game even attempts, with its fishbowl-like views on the side of the screen, to communicate to the player what they cannot see to the sides, and red silhouettes can even show enemies that are behind you. Rather than work with a high score that may take longer and longer to reach, Hyperdemon's high score is based on violence of action. The promise of a high score is based on density, where time and great playing coincide to make the game a sort of speedrun of itself. There is a rubber banding effect where a player can lose time only to gain it elsewhere. Only players who manage not just violence, but player positioning afterward, can they link kills together to increase their time. This to me is an insanely powerful idea, one that every game should aspire to. We cannot just have games that force players into endurance runs for hours. Better to make runs effective and efficient. Nothing feels worse after achieving a very high score than to learn that you'll need to spend hours getting back to that flow state, getting back to that feeling. Hyperdemon avoids the issue by basing time and score as a synonymous entity. When people see both Devil Daggers and Hyperdemon side by side and complain that they are very similar, I would urge you to think about these outside mechanics that fundamentally change the way it is played. When I consider what a sequel should be, part of me wishes that games would do this more. Make the sequel efficient by reusing assets, okay, but do so in a way that asks profound questions and takes creative risk. This is why I am a larger fan of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask rather than The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time. The remix of the original assets turns Zelda into a darker and brooding experience. Not only that, but gameplay benefits in profoundly different ways as well. So it goes with Hyperdemon compared to Devil Daggers. Hyperdemon is shaping up to be my game of the year for 2022. In a time where AAA studios are going bigger and failing miserably, it might do for the industry to go back to square one. There are the legs that come from endlessly monetizing an experience, and then there are the legs for a game that comes from years, perhaps decades, of playing a game and holding it in high regard. We are so fixated on a profit now system, rather than a prestige later system, that gaming may be doomed to force serious gamers into side alleys to find what they believe to be an authentic and compelling experience. Much like film, there is what is playing in popcorn theaters, and then there is the cult collection of what you own in your own home. Hyperdemon is very much in that latter category. Thanks for watching.